"Don't hurt me," Apache woman whispered to the lonely cowboy that saved her from drowning. It moved fast and wild, thick with mud, broken branches, and the sound of rushing water that never seemed to rest. The banks were soft and slippery. The air smelled of wet earth and storm. Caleb Turner had been riding alone along that river for most of the day. He did not belong to any ranch anymore. He did not have a town waiting for him. He owned a horse, a worn saddle, and a small bedroll. That was enough for someone who had learned to live without much. He liked the quiet, or at least he had told himself that for a long time. The desert stretched wide around him. Brown hills rose in the distance, sharp against the fading sky. The sun was slowly lowering, turning the clouds orange and red. It should have been peaceful. It would have been beautiful to someone else. But Caleb's mind was not on the sunset. He kept replaying old memories, a small wooden house, a fence he once built with his own hands, laughter that used to fill empty space. All of it was gone now. Illness had taken his wife 2 winters ago. Debt had taken the ranch soon after. He had signed papers he barely understood, handed over keys he once carried proudly, and ridden away before anyone could see how broken he felt. Since then, he had kept moving, town to town, job to job, never staying long enough to grow roots again. That evening, as his horse walked slowly along the riverbank, Caleb planned to make camp before dark. The ground near the water was flat, and there were scattered trees that could block the wind. He scanned the area carefully. Living alone on open land meant always paying attention. That was when he noticed something strange in the river. At first, he thought it was a log, something long and dark caught in the current. The water pushed it forward, then spun it around. It disappeared under the surface and came back again. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Logs did not move like that. He pulled gently on the reins and guided his horse closer to the edge. The river roared loudly, almost drowning out every other sound. The object surfaced again, closer now. It was not wood, it was a person. For one short second, Caleb froze. The current was strong. The water was high. One wrong step could pull a man under just as easily. But he did not think about himself for long. He jumped down from his horse, tied the reins quickly to a low branch, and stepped into the water. The cold hit him like a shock. It pushed hard against his legs, trying to knock him off balance. Mud swirled around his boots, making it hard to feel solid ground. He moved slowly at first, then faster as the body drifted closer. It was a woman. Her dark hair floated around her face. Her arm lifted slightly with the water and then fell again. She was not fighting the river anymore. She was not moving at all. "Hold on," Caleb muttered under his breath, even though he did not know if she could hear him. The current pulled her away just as he reached forward. He lunged, stretching his arm as far as he could. His fingers brushed her sleeve, slipped, then caught again. He grabbed tightly and pulled her toward him. The river fought back. Water splashed into his face. He swallowed mud and coughed, but he did not let go. He turned his body sideways to move with the current instead of against it, using all his strength to guide her toward the shore. Step by step, slipping and stumbling, he dragged her closer until finally his boots hit firmer ground. With one last effort, he lifted her partially over his shoulder and stumbled onto the muddy bank. He fell to his knees, breathing hard, the sound of the river still roaring behind him. For a moment, everything was still except for the rushing water. The woman lay on her side, motionless. Her clothes were soaked and torn from the force of the river. She wore traditional Apache clothing, the fabric detailed and carefully made despite the damage. There were small beads along the edges, now dulled by mud. Caleb felt a tight feeling in his chest. He had not expected this. Trouble often followed moments like this. He gently turned her onto her back and checked for breathing. There it was, faint, but there. He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Come on," he said quietly. "Stay with me." He pressed lightly on her back to help push water from her lungs. After a few tense seconds, she coughed. Water spilled from her mouth and she gasped for air. Relief washed over him, her eyelids fluttered. She looked confused at first, staring up at the darkening sky, then her eyes focused on him. Fear filled them instantly. She tried to move away, but her body was too weak. Her hands trembled as she pushed weakly against the ground. "Don't hurt me," she whispered. Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Caleb felt the words more than he heard them. He slowly leaned back, lifting his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe." But she did not look convinced. Up close, he could see small bruises along her arms. Faint marks around her wrists, as if rope had once been tied there. Her face was pale from cold and exhaustion, but beneath that he could see strength, the kind built from surviving hard days. The sky was growing darker. The temperature would drop soon, and she was soaked through. "You'll freeze if we stay like this," Caleb said gently. He spoke slowly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm going to start a fire. I won't touch you unless you say it's all right." She watched him closely, studying every move. Caleb stood carefully and walked back to his horse. He grabbed his bedroll and a spare blanket. He kept his back slightly turned toward her, giving her space. Every motion was slow, careful, as if he were approaching a frightened animal. He gathered dry twigs from beneath a nearby tree where the rain had not reached. It took time, but eventually a small flame flickered to life. The fire crackled softly, pushing back the growing cold. He placed the blanket near her but did not wrap it around her himself. Instead, he stepped away. "You can use this," he said. For a long moment, she did nothing. Then slowly she reached for the blanket and pulled it around her shoulders. Her hands shook from the cold. Caleb sat on the other side of the fire, far enough to give her comfort, close enough to help if she needed it. The flames lit both of their faces in warm orange light. The river still roared beside them, but it no longer felt as powerful as before. Silence settled between them. He studied her quietly. She looked young, perhaps in her early 20s. Strong features, proud posture, even in weakness. She kept glancing at him, ready to react if he made a sudden move. He understood why. Men who looked like him had not always been kind to people like her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said after a while. "My name is Caleb." She did not answer. The fire popped softly, sending sparks into the air. He did not press her with more questions. He had learned that silence could sometimes be more comforting than words. The desert night grew colder. Stars began to appear above them, bright and endless. The wind moved gently across the land, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant sage. After some time, her breathing slowed. The shaking lessened. She kept her eyes open, but they no longer held the same sharp panic as before. Caleb stared into the fire, listening to the river, wondering how close she had come to disappearing beneath its surface forever. And he could not stop thinking about her whisper. "Don't hurt me." Those 3 words followed him long after the flames burned lower, long after the sky turned fully dark. Because in her voice, he had heard more than fear of one man. He had heard fear of the world. And for the first time in a long while, Caleb Turner felt something stronger than loneliness. He felt responsible. The fire burned low through the night, and Caleb woke several times to make sure it did not go out. Each time he opened his eyes, he checked on her first. She stayed awake most of the night, sitting with the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Even when she looked tired, she did not fully relax. Morning came slowly. The sun rose over the desert hills, painting the sky in soft gold. The river had calmed just a little, though it still moved fast and heavy. Birds began to call from nearby trees, and the world seemed almost peaceful again. Caleb stood and stretched carefully. His clothes were stiff from dried river water. He walked a short distance away to give her space, then returned with a small canteen. "You should drink," he said gently, placing it on the ground between them instead of handing it directly to her. She hesitated before reaching for it. Her hands were steadier now. She took a few small sips and kept her eyes on him the entire time. Up close in the daylight, he could see her more clearly. Her dark hair was long and thick, falling over her shoulders in loose waves. Her face was strong and proud, though there was deep exhaustion behind her eyes. The marks on her wrists were more visible in the morning light. They were not fresh, but they were not old either. Caleb noticed, but he did not ask about them yet. "My name is Caleb," he repeated quietly. "You don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to." She stayed silent for a moment. The wind moved lightly across the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. Finally, she spoke. "A pony." Her voice was soft but steady this time. "That's a strong name," Caleb said with a small nod. She did not smile, but something in her eyes shifted slightly. Not warmth yet, but maybe curiosity. They sat in silence again. Caleb took a small piece of dried meat from his saddlebag and placed it near her side of the fire. "You need strength," he said. "It's a long walk out here." She looked at the food, then at him. "Why?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "Why what?" "Why did you pull me from the river?" The question caught him off guard. He shrugged slightly. "Because you were drowning." She watched him carefully, as if searching for something hidden in his answer. Many men would not stop. He knew that was true. The land around them had seen too much anger in recent years, Too many fights over territory, power, and fear. Trust between people had become thin as paper. "I'm not many men," Caleb replied simply. Her gaze dropped to the fire. After some time, she stood slowly. Her legs were weak, but she refused help when he half rose from his seat. She steadied herself and looked around at the open land. The desert stretched wide in every direction. There were no towns nearby, no safe buildings, just hills, sand, and sky. "Where are we?" she asked. "Near the Rio Grande," he answered. "A few miles from any main trail." Her shoulders tightened slightly at the word trail. "You were running," Caleb said carefully. "From someone." It was not a question. A pony's jaw stiffened. She looked toward the river as if it held memories she wished to forget. "They came before the sun rose," she said quietly. "Men with horses, loud voices, they searched our homes." Caleb listened without interrupting. "My family told me to run," she continued. "To reach the trees near the river, I thought I could cross before they saw me." She closed her eyes briefly. "The water was stronger than I thought." He imagined the scene. Early morning, confusion, fear, the sound of strangers shouting. It was not hard to picture. "Are they still looking for you?" he asked gently. "Yes." The single word carried weight. Caleb felt a slow, heavy feeling settle in his chest. Trouble had found him again, even out here where he thought he was far from everything. But when he looked at her, shivering slightly despite the morning sun, he knew he could not just ride away. "Where were you headed?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "West, toward the mountains," he nodded slowly. The Chiricahua Mountains were far, but not impossible to reach. The land between here and there was rough and dry with little cover. "You won't make it alone," he said honestly. Her eyes flashed. "I have walked alone before." "I don't doubt that," he replied calmly. "But if those men are still searching, they'll follow tracks. Out here, tracks last a long time." She knew he was right. He could see it in her expression. The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust across the ground. Caleb looked toward his horse, then back at her. "I can take you west," he offered. "At least part of the way. I know the land." "Why would you help me?" she asked again, suspicion returning. Caleb thought for a moment before answering. "Because you asked me not to hurt you. And I don't aim to be the kind of man who ignores that." She studied him in silence. The desert felt very quiet around them, as if waiting for her decision. Trust did not come easily to her. He could see that. Every movement he made, she watched closely. Every word he spoke, she weighed carefully. "Men who look like you," she said slowly, "have brought pain to my people." He did not argue, he did not defend himself. "I know," he said quietly. The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise her. After a long pause, she nodded once. "You may walk beside me," she said, "but not too close." A small breath of relief escaped him. "Fair enough." They packed quietly. Caleb rolled his bedroll and tied it behind his saddle. He made sure to leave no obvious signs of their camp. He scattered dirt over the ashes of the fire and brushed away footprints near the water. A pony watched his movements with interest. "You hide your trail," she observed. "Habit," he said. "Out here, it's good to stay unnoticed." When they began walking, he led the horse slowly so she could keep pace. He offered to let her ride, but she refused at first. Pride and caution both held her back. The sun climbed higher as they moved west. The ground shifted from soft mud near the river to dry sand and scattered rocks. Small desert plants dotted the land, stubborn and strong. For a while they walked in silence. Then a pony spoke again. "You travel alone?" "Yes." "No family?" The question hit deeper than he expected. "Not anymore." She glanced at him briefly but did not ask more. Hours passed. The heat grew stronger. Caleb handed her the canteen again and made sure she drank enough. She still kept her distance, but she no longer flinched every time he stepped closer. At one point, she stumbled slightly on a loose rock. Without thinking, he reached out to steady her. She tensed at his touch but did not pull away immediately. He let go as soon as she found her balance. "Thank you," she said softly. It was the first time her voice carried something other than fear or caution. By late afternoon, they reached a small stretch of rocky hills that offered some cover from open view. Caleb paused and scanned the horizon carefully. In the far distance, faint but clear against the bright land, he saw movement, 3 small shapes, riders. His jaw tightened. A pony noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" He did not want to alarm her too quickly, but he would not lie either. "We're not as alone as we hoped," he said quietly. Her face lost its small trace of calm. She turned slowly, following his gaze. Far away, but coming closer. The past she had tried to outrun was still behind her. Caleb felt the weight of a choice settling on his shoulders again. He could leave now, ride fast and disappear. It would be easier, safer. But when he looked at a pony, standing there with fear returning to her eyes, he knew he would not. The lonely road he had been walking had just changed direction. And this time he would not walk it alone. The three riders in the distance were no longer small shapes against the land. As the sun lowered behind them, their outlines became clearer. They were spread out slightly, not riding side by side, but in a loose line. That meant they were searching carefully. Caleb stood still for a few seconds, studying them. The desert was open here. There were rocks and small hills, but not enough trees to hide behind for long. If the riders reached the riverbank and saw signs of the camp, they would follow the trail west. And Caleb knew he had not been able to erase every footprint near the muddy ground. A pony's breathing grew faster. "They found my tracks," she whispered. "Maybe," Caleb said calmly. "Maybe not yet, but we need to move smarter now." He gently pulled the horse behind a cluster of tall rocks and motioned for a pony to crouch low. She did so without argument. The fear in her eyes was clear, but so was her strength. She was not someone who gave up easily. Caleb looked again toward the riders. They were still far, but moving steadily. He could not hear them yet, but he imagined the steady rhythm of hooves on dry ground. "We can't keep walking straight west," he said quietly. "If they're tracking you, they'll expect that." A pony nodded. "There is a narrow path through those hills," she said, pointing slightly to the south. "My father once showed me when I was young." Caleb studied the land she pointed toward. From where they stood, it looked like solid rock, but she might be right. People who grew up on this land saw details others missed. "Can it hide us?" he asked. "For a while," she answered. "If we are careful, that's enough." They moved quickly but quietly toward the rocky area. Caleb led the horse slowly to avoid leaving deep marks in the sand. When they reached the edge of the hills, a pony guided them through a narrow opening between two large stones. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a shadow. Inside, the path twisted sharply. Large rocks blocked most outside views. The ground changed from soft sand to harder stone, which meant fewer tracks. Caleb felt a small sense of relief. "Good eye," he said. A pony did not respond, but he noticed her shoulders straighten slightly. She was used to surviving. She was not helpless. They moved deeper into the rocky pass. The air felt cooler there, protected from the open sun. For a few minutes, the world outside seemed far away, but then they heard it, faint at first. Then clearer, hoofbeats. A pony froze. "They are closer," she said. Caleb listened carefully. The sound echoed strangely against the rocks, making it hard to judge distance. But the riders were definitely not as far as before. "They must have seen where we turned," he muttered. The narrow path ahead became even tighter. At one point, the rocks nearly touched on both sides. Caleb had to remove some gear from the saddle to help the horse squeeze through. "Leave it," a pony whispered when he struggled with a heavy sack. "It has supplies," he replied. "It will slow us down." He hesitated. She was right. After a second, he dropped the sack behind a rock and continued forward. Survival meant choosing what mattered most. The hoofbeats grew louder. Caleb's mind worked quickly. If the riders entered this narrow pass, there would be little space to move. No open ground. No easy escape. They needed an advantage. The path ahead curved sharply left. Beyond that curve, Caleb saw a small rise in the rock wall. It was not tall, but it gave a higher view of the entrance. "Go ahead," he told a pony. "Take the horse around the bend and stay low." She looked at him sharply. "What will you do? Make sure they don't rush in without thinking." Her eyes searched his face. "You cannot face 3 men alone." "I'm not planning to," he said calmly. "I just need to slow them down." For a moment, it seemed she might argue. But then she nodded once and carefully led the horse around the curve, disappearing from sight. Caleb climbed the small rock rise quietly. From there, he could see the entrance of the pass clearly. The riders were now very close. Dust followed behind them as they approached. He recognized the look on their faces even from a distance. Focused, determined, not planning to turn back easily. One of them pointed toward the narrow opening in the rocks. They slowed their horses. Good, Caleb thought. They were cautious. He picked up a small stone and tossed it farther down the pass, making it clatter loudly against the rocks. The sudden noise echoed sharply. The riders stopped. One of them dismounted and stepped forward carefully, scanning the entrance. Caleb stayed low, hidden behind the rock edge. The man stepped into the opening slightly, peering inside. The narrowness forced him to move slowly. Caleb picked up a larger stone and threw it high against the rock wall deeper inside the pass. The loud crash echoed again, sounding bigger than it was. The horses outside shifted nervously at the sharp sound. The rider inside paused and stepped back quickly. From his hidden spot, Caleb heard one of the riders say, "It's too tight, could be a trap." Another voice answered, "They can't be far." Caleb stayed silent. Minutes passed. The riders did not rush in. They spoke quietly among themselves. Finally, one of them said, "We circle around. There's another path north of here." The hoofbeats began to move away. Caleb did not move for several seconds. He waited until the sound grew faint again before carefully climbing down. When he rounded the bend, a pony was waiting, eyes wide with tension. "They are gone?" she asked. "For now," he replied, "but they may try another route." She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her face. "You made them believe this place was dangerous," she said. "Sometimes fear works better than force," he answered. They continued through the narrow path until it opened into a hidden valley between the hills. It was small but sheltered, with patches of dry grass and a few twisted trees. From outside, it would be hard to see. Caleb finally allowed himself to breathe easier. "We'll rest here for a short time," he said. "Not long." A pony sat on a flat stone, exhaustion finally showing clearly. The long walk, the fear, the constant tension, it had drained her. "You risked your life," she said quietly after a while. Caleb shook his head. "I threw rocks." "You stayed," she corrected. He did not answer that. The wind moved gently through the valley, carrying away some of the heavy silence between them. After a few minutes, a pony spoke again. "Those men will not stop easily." "I know. They want reward money, land, power." Caleb looked at the ground. "There are men who believe taking is easier than building." She studied him carefully. "You are not like them." He met her gaze. "I've made mistakes in my life, but I won't make that one." Something in her expression softened. The fear was still there, but it no longer stood between them like a wall. The sun began to lower again, painting the sky with warm light. They had survived another close moment, but the journey was not over. In the quiet of that hidden valley, both of them understood something clearly. The riders would return, and next time it might not be so easy to scare them away. The hidden valley gave them a short break, but not real safety. As the sun began to set, Caleb knew they could not stay there long. The riders had turned away for now, but men who chased rewards did not give up easily. They would search other paths, they would circle back. "We move again after dark," Caleb said quietly. A pony nodded. She was tired, but she did not complain. She understood the danger better than anyone. They waited until the sky turned deep purple and the first stars appeared. The air cooled quickly once the sun disappeared behind the hills. Caleb adjusted the saddle and finally convinced a pony to ride the horse while he walked beside it. "You need your strength," he told her. "I can manage." At first she resisted, but her body was too worn to argue for long. She climbed onto the horse carefully. Caleb noticed she still kept her distance, sitting straight and alert, as if ready to jump down at any moment. They left the valley through a narrow exit on the far side and followed a faint rocky trail that curved west. The ground was mostly stone now, which meant fewer tracks. The moon gave just enough light to see ahead. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The desert at night felt different from the daytime heat. It was quieter, almost thoughtful. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of boots on gravel, the soft breath of the horse, the whisper of wind across dry grass. After several miles, Caleb noticed a pony shifting slightly in the saddle. "You all right?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "The world feels very large at night," she said. He understood that feeling well. "It can," he replied, "but sometimes large also means freedom." She looked down at him. "You speak as someone who has walked alone many nights." "I have. Why?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Caleb walked in silence for a few steps before answering. "Because staying in one place hurt too much." A pony did not press him, but her eyes remained on him, waiting. "My wife became sick 2 winters ago," he continued quietly. "There was no doctor close enough, no medicine strong enough. I watched her fade a little each day." The memory tightened his voice, but he kept walking. "After she was gone, the ranch did not survive long. I tried, but it felt empty. Every corner reminded me of what I lost." A pony listened carefully. "So you chose the road," she said. "Yes. And did it heal you?" Caleb gave a small, sad smile. "It kept me moving. That is not the same as healing." They walked a little farther in silence. A pony looked ahead at the dark hills. My father used to say that pain is like a storm, she said softly. You cannot outrun it, you must stand through it. Caleb glanced up at her. Did he stand through his storms? Yes, she answered. But he did not stand alone, my mother stood beside him. There was something in her tone, longing mixed with strength. Are they safe? Caleb asked gently. She looked down at her hands. I do not know. That simple truth hung heavy between them. Hours passed. Near midnight, they reached a shallow canyon with higher rock walls and thicker brush. Caleb decided it was safe enough to rest for a short while. They made no fire this time. The darkness would hide them better. A pony slid off the horse slowly. The long day and night had drained her more than she admitted. As soon as her feet touched the ground, her legs trembled slightly. Caleb noticed. Sit, he said softly. She lowered herself onto a flat rock. The moonlight showed her face clearly now. She looked pale. Her breathing was slower than before. Caleb's eyes moved to his own shoulder. The place where the river had slammed him against a hidden branch earlier now throbbed painfully. He had ignored it all day. When he reached up and touched it, he winced. A pony saw the movement. You are hurt. It's nothing, he replied quickly. She stood despite her exhaustion and stepped closer. He could see hesitation in her movements, but also determination. Let me see. For a moment, he almost refused. He had grown used to handling pain alone. But something in her voice stopped him. He slowly removed his outer shirt, revealing a deep bruise and a cut along his shoulder. It was not life-threatening, but it was worse than he had admitted. A pony's expression changed. Not fear this time, concern. You did not speak of this, she said. We had other things to worry about. She knelt near him and gently examined the wound. Her touch was careful but steady. She did not flinch at the sight of dried blood. You cannot ignore this, she said quietly. Infection comes quickly in heat. Caleb let out a slow breath. You sound like you've treated wounds before. My mother taught me, she replied. She knows plants that help healing. She stood and moved toward a patch of low shrubs growing near the canyon wall. Under the moonlight, she searched carefully, touching leaves and stems until she found what she needed. Caleb watched her with quiet respect. She returned with a handful of leaves and crushed them gently between two stones, mixing them with a small amount of water from the canteen. The smell was sharp but clean. Hold still, she said. He did. She applied the crushed leaves to the cut and wrapped it with a clean piece of cloth torn from the edge of her dress. Her movements were slow and focused. The same woman who had whispered in fear by the river now worked with calm strength. You saved me, she said quietly as she tied the cloth. Now I help you. Caleb looked at her. We're even. She shook her head slightly. No, trust is not even, it grows. Her words stayed with him. When she finished, she sat back against the rock wall, clearly drained. Caleb pulled his blanket from the saddle and gently placed it around her shoulders. This time she did not flinch at his closeness. You need rest, he said. So do you, she answered. They sat side by side in the quiet canyon, not touching, but no longer divided by fear. The night air grew colder. Caleb leaned his head back against the rock and closed his eyes briefly. For the first time in many months, he did not feel completely alone. After a while, a pony spoke again, her voice softer than before. When I woke by the river, I believed I would suffer again, she admitted. I believed all men in boots and hats were the same. Caleb did not interrupt. But you did not hurt me, she continued. You stood between me and danger. He opened his eyes and looked at her. I stood because it was right. She met his gaze steadily. Right choices are not always easy. A faint sound echoed in the distance then, far away but real, hoofbeats. Both of them stiffened. Caleb slowly stood and moved to the edge of the canyon, peering into the darkness. The riders had not given up. They found another trail, he said quietly. A pony stood beside him, no longer trembling. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. We keep moving, she said firmly. Caleb nodded. This time, when he reached for the horse's reins, she placed her hand briefly on his arm, not in fear, but in trust. The desert night was not finished with them. But neither were they finished fighting for their freedom. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance did not fade this time. It grew clearer. Caleb stood at the edge of the canyon, listening carefully. The riders were not rushing wildly. They were moving steady and confident, as if they believed they were close. They learned our direction, he said quietly. A pony stepped beside him. Her face was calm now, not frozen in fear like before. The long journey had changed something inside her. She was still cautious, but no longer helpless. "There is a high ridge beyond this canyon," she said. "If we reach it before sunrise, we can see far in every direction." Caleb nodded. "Then that's where we go." They did not waste time. Apache mounted the horse again, but this time she did not argue when Caleb walked close beside her. The distance that once stood between them had slowly disappeared. The canyon path narrowed and then climbed upward. The ground was uneven, covered in loose stones. The horse struggled at some points and Caleb had to guide it carefully. The moonlight was fading as clouds drifted across the sky. Behind them, the riders' sounds echoed against the rocks. "They are careful," Apache whispered. "So are we," Caleb replied. They climbed for what felt like hours. The wind grew stronger as they gained height. By the time the first light of dawn touched the sky, they reached the ridge. From there, the desert stretched endlessly. Hills rolled into the distance. Small trails cut through the land like faint scars. And far below, near the mouth of the canyon, 3 riders were visible. They had stopped. One of them pointed upward. "They see us," Apache said. Caleb studied the land around the ridge. The slope behind them was steep but not impossible. If they continued west, the ground would become rougher, filled with larger rocks and scattered trees. It would slow horses down. "We don't run straight," Caleb said. "We move along the ridge first. Let them guess." Apache nodded. They guided the horse along the top, keeping just below the skyline so their shapes would not stand clearly against the sky. The riders below began climbing, but the steep path forced them to slow down. The sun rose fully now, painting the desert in warm gold. The beauty of the morning felt strange compared to the tension in the air. After a mile along the ridge, Caleb spotted something ahead, a cluster of trees near a shallow valley. Smoke rose faintly from within it. Apache saw it too, her breath caught. "That is my people," she said. Hope flickered in her voice. The distance was not far, but it was not safe yet. "They will see the smoke too," Caleb said, glancing back at the riders who were still climbing. "We must reach them first," she replied firmly. They began descending the far side of the ridge carefully. The slope was rocky and uneven, but it led toward the trees. Caleb moved quickly now, guiding the horse with urgency. Halfway down, one of the riders reached the top of the ridge behind them. Caleb could feel the moment tightening. "They are close," Apache said. He stopped suddenly and turned to her. "Listen to me," he said clearly. "When we reach the trees, ride straight in, do not look back." "And you?" she asked. "I'll follow." Her eyes searched his face. "You promise?" "I promise." There was no time for more words. They reached the bottom of the slope and crossed the open ground toward the trees. The smoke became clearer. Shapes moved among the trunks. Voices called out in a language Caleb did not understand. Apache lifted her voice and answered loudly. The figures among the trees froze for a second. Then several people rushed forward. The riders behind them had reached the slope's edge. They shouted something, but their voices were lost in the distance. Caleb did not turn around. Apache rode into the trees where her people gathered around her. Faces filled with shock and relief surrounded her. Hands reached out to touch her shoulders, her hair, her face, making sure she was truly there. Caleb slowed the horse and stopped at the edge of the trees. He did not step further in. This was her place. Several men from her group stepped forward cautiously, watching him with guarded eyes. Apache quickly turned and spoke to them. Her voice was strong and steady. She pointed toward Caleb and then back toward the ridge. The men listened carefully. Some nodded. Moments later, a few of them moved toward the open land, standing in a line between the trees and the approaching riders. The 3 riders on the ridge paused when they saw the gathering below. They remained there for several long seconds. Then slowly they turned their horses. They did not come down. Caleb watched until they disappeared over the hill. The danger had passed. For the first time in days, the air felt light. Apache walked back toward him. Her eyes were no longer filled with fear. They held something new, strength mixed with gratitude. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "I said I would." She stood close to him now, no longer keeping distance. "My family is safe," she said. "They hid when the men came. They feared I was lost." Caleb nodded. "I'm glad they were wrong." There was a pause between them, but it was not uncomfortable. "You could stay," she said after a moment. "My people would not forget what you did." He looked toward the trees where her family surrounded her with relief and warmth. He felt the pull of it, belonging, community, something solid, but he also knew something else. "I don't belong here," he said gently. "This is your home." She studied him carefully. "And where is yours?" He looked out at the wide desert beyond the ridge. For a long time he had believed he had no answer. I don't know yet, he admitted. A pony stepped closer and placed her hand lightly over his uninjured shoulder. When I woke by the river, she said quietly, I believed the world only brought pain. He listened closely. But you showed me that not every hand reaches to harm. Some hands reach to save. Her voice was steady now, not trembling. You gave me a reason not to hate, she continued. The words stayed in the air between them. Caleb felt something shift inside his chest, something lighter than regret, stronger than loneliness. You saved yourself, he said softly. You never stopped fighting. She smiled faintly. It was the first true smile he had seen from her. Perhaps, she said. But you stood beside me. Voices called her name from within the trees. Her family waited. She stepped back slowly. Wherever you ride next, she said, may the road be kinder to you. And may the river never take you again, he replied. For a brief second, they simply looked at each other, two people from different worlds who had shared danger, fear, and trust. Then she turned and walked back toward her people. Caleb remained at the edge of the trees for a while, watching as she was welcomed fully into the circle of her family. Laughter rose softly. Relief filled the air. When he finally turned his horse west again, the desert did not feel as empty as before. He had begun this journey as a man running from his past. He left it knowing he had done something that mattered. The river had almost taken a life that day. Instead, it had carried two strangers together long enough to change them both. And though Caleb rode alone once more, he was no longer lonely. Somewhere beyond the hills, a woman who once whispered in fear would remember him not with pain, but with peace.